Morning, everybody. And I just heard during the break that the sound might be pressed towards the back. So can you hear me now when I'm talking? You can. Just let us know if that changes during the course of the day. Just let where I'm speaking. Just look your hand at some stage. So I'm, as Sonia said, I'm from the clinical research facility for study in Lisbon. And I was asked to speak today about study files and documentation. So really what I want to concentrate on this morning is looking at the specific types of study files that we're talking about and how the study is documented in the support of the delivery of the study and also to ensure that there is compliance from both the site investigator level and also from the sponsor perspective. And this really, we go into what is study documentation, some of the essential records or documents that would be required, the creation and controlled release and distribution of those documents, and also the filing and storage of documents, both while the study is running and also towards the end of the study and at the point of archiving, which can be quite lengthy, and I'll go into that later on. Now, both of these really will affect both the site and investigator clinical teams, and will also involve, of course, the sponsor, who is the entity that's responsible for managing and operationalising the study and supporting the study for all the investigators and all the sites that are delivering the study. I'll finish off then with some commentary on good documentation practice, GDP, some of the guidelines there and the requirements, and reference to a set of principles in a framework called ADCOA, or ADCOAC, it used to be called, and more recently it's ADCOA Plus, because it just keeps getting a few more conditions added on. So I'll get to all of those later on. So when we're talking about study files, really, we're talking about we can divide these into two different types of study files, both at the level of the sponsor and at the level of the site. And at the site level, this can be further broken down into the investigator site file, which contains the essential documents or records. Now, I'll detail why I'm highlighting that specifically later on. And that demonstrates that the clinical trial site and the investigator are following regulatory and ethical requirements as set out by GCP. Now, a site file, for anybody who's working in clinical trials, this starts off quite contained. Over time, for a 5-year, 10-year study, this grows legs. There can be quite a number of volumes in those, so they can be quite hefty. This sits alongside the participant information relay that sits within the participant study file. That contains any of the participant and the study-specific information relating specifically to that participant in the study. And this can include the signed informed consent forms and questionnaires that might be completed case report forms and so on. And then there might be other locations within the site documentation pool that would sit elsewhere. And this would include patient medical charts, electronic health records, any other files that the study team would use to support the delivery of the study at the site. So these are all very important when it comes to delivering and maintaining a good documentation trail of what was done, when it was done, by whom, which at the very end I'll summarise through the ADCOA. As I said then, any of these documents within the study file can be paper or electronic, so we have to consider ways to access, control and store all of those documents further down the line. So this is all very important to remember. On the other side of the fence, then, we're looking at the sponsor documents, and these really can be categorized under what we call a TMF, or a trial master file. And this consists of essential documents or records that enable both the conduct of clinical trial and the quality of the data produced to be evaluated. And this has to be in accordance with the applicable regulations, whether it's the regulatory requirements from the competent authority or ethics or institutional requirements. So all of this can be retained in the trial master file. So for every study, you'll have one trial master file, again, multiple volumes, and you'll also have one investigator site file or one institutional site file, one ISF per study, per site, per investigator. Sorry, I had a highlighted spot there. It is important to note that it had to, and it should really be abandoned if these documents and these records are not complete. So it is critical to make sure that the documents, the institutional site file, all of the other documents retained by the site and by the sponsor have to be complete for the appropriate stage of the trial as well. So just know that, and I will comment on that every time because it is very important. And if you ever sit in front of inspectors, international or the Irish inspector, it is something that will come up. You have to show completeness to demonstrate what you've done, who did what, at what time, and so on. And all of this documentation is available at when it is needed. So when we talk about study documentation really refers to all of the study documents and the records, and also the process by which those documents are created and distributed, and how the study data is documented. And all of this really comes under the umbrella of study documentation. And really, study documentation serves as evidence to demonstrate the conduct of the research, the quality of the data collected, and the compliance of the investigator and the sponsor with applicable regulatory, ethical, and institutional requirements. So all of this can be captured as evidence to show that you are compliant and you are protecting the rights and safety of the patients and their data. So when we're talking about study documents and records, this really is qualified per GCP as all records in any form, and this can be written, electronic, any source data from scans and so on, that might describe or record the methods, conduct, and results of the trial, parties affecting a trial, and many, and any actions taken either in the setup of the trial and during the course of the study and the trial further analysis and distribution of results. So this can be further broken down into essential and non-essential documents. So in essence, essential documents, as laid out in section 8 of GCP, revision 2 of GCP from 2016, these are documents that individually and collectively permit evaluation of the conduct of the study and the quality of the data produced and how compliant you have been throughout the course of the study. Now, I have to point out that the landscape in clinical research changes very often. You have to keep on top of it. If something changes, if you're not aware of it, you can't plead ignorance, you have to be compliant. The reason I'm bringing this up is we have a revision I've noted there. There is a revision to GCP coming up. It's this month, apparently it's going to be released, and then it is going to take a bit of time to be enacted internationally. So we're at Rev 2 of GCP, and this will be brought through revision 3 from this month onwards. And the section on essential documents really has changed slightly, well, actually changed quite significantly, but the essence is still the same. It is section 8 in GCP Rev 2 and section appendix C in the next revision of GCP. So with significantly, there is a list of records that are always expected to be present as essential records, and then others that, if they are produced, they will then in turn be deemed essential. And it provides more guidance as well on what makes a record essential. And it also factors in for duplication of records and recognition of new technologies and so on. A number of changes there, but it's a lot of changes where needed. It hasn't changed since 2016. So here, really, when we're talking about the categories of documents and records, they can be grouped, broadly speaking, under, from the perspectives of both site and sponsor, under coordination, trial monitoring, safety vigilance, management of the data, and how the data is going to be analysed subsequently and throughout the course of the study. The intervention, whether it's a drug study, a medical device, if it's a lifestyle intervention, any of the details around that can be factored in. Legal and financial considerations, and any documents that are created by the site, source documents, all of that really can be captured under these different categories. It is important, as I mentioned, I'm going to say this now and one more time later on, to ensure that all documents are found in your corresponding files, whether it's a site file or whether it's a TMF. Make sure that they are as complete as possible for the right stage of the study. That is critical. It will save you lots of headache for down the line. It's better to highlight a problem and solve it now than try to solve it in a year or worse in 5 years. So We're looking at the importance of essential documents. Why are they important per GCP? They demonstrate the compliance of the investigator, sponsor, and sponsors monitor with good clinical practice and the applicable regulatory and ethical regulations requirements. Filing the documents in a timely manner will aid in the management of your study throughout the course of the study and towards the end at the point of document for all entities, for all stakeholders. It will help you to reconstruct how the trial was conducted and who did what and who was authorised to do what. Essential documents will be reviewed. Keep coming back to this, we've been recently inspected, so they will be reviewed in audits and inspections, and Kate later on will go through audits and inspections and the difference between those and so on. The sponsor and the site should maintain the documents for the duration of clinical trial and for generally a defined period thereafter, and this is defined depending on the type of study you have, and I will comment on that later on, and make sure that they're not going to be accidentally or prematurely destroyed, which will be in breach of the regulations. The sponsor should tell the site when the documents are no longer required to be retained and can be destroyed. So again, it's very difficult to justify something being destroyed unless you have stated per GDPR, you might have told the participant that your data will only be retained for this period. So then you have to be compliant with what you told that patient to protect their rights in relation to their data. And lastly, any transfer of ownership of the data should be reported to the appropriate authority as required. So I've talked quite a lot about the institutional site, or sorry, the investigator site file and the trial master file, and it looks, from what I've said so far, very separate. However, there's a good bit of overlap between both, and the overlap is necessary to support the delivery of the study and to give the right people access to the right documents at the right time, and to control release. So there are a number of documents that are common between the ISF and the TMF. And this can include the protocol, the investigative brochure, which I'm going to template documents, legal contracts, guidance, manuals on how to control biological, or how to manage your biological samples, or how to manage your intervention, your drug or your medical device, or so on. So the documents that we're talking about can be broken down into 3 different phases before a study starts, during the course of the study, and then at the point of wind up or termination of the study. And really what you need to have in place before you get your study off the ground, this is not exhaustive, this is just a selection of some of the documents. And again, refer back to the Section 8, Reg 2, or Appendix C, Reg 3, for the contents of these. So I've picked out a couple that I want to highlight. The investigation brochure is a compilation of the clinical and non-clinical data of the investigational product. It's relevant to the study of that product in human subjects. And also then the protocol is one of the key documents that will be required. So the protocol and the informed consent form, both we could say would be 2 of the most important documents for any clinical trial. As Sonia said, informed consent is critical. So clinical trials should be described in a clear, concise, and operationally feasible protocol, which details who is doing what, the management of the data, the study design, the stats approach, how safety will be overseen, and so on. And this should be designed to minimize unnecessary complexity and to mitigate or eliminate any risks to patients or to their data. The next thing I wanted to mention was the participant materials. Really covers quite a variety of documents, including informed consent forms, patient information leaflets, which explains the details of the study, any questionnaires you might provide to the patients, any advertisements that you might see around the hospitals, in a coffee shop, all of those documents that might be presented to a patient, however they are presented, needs to be retained and needs to be prepared, approved, and retained in your file before you get the study out of the ground. And then I have a number of other examples there: financial aspects of the trial, insurance, and indemnity provisions, contracts, legal agreements, all approvals approvals, ethics, regulatory, institutional approvals, the CVs for the team involved, so critically the investigator, and all of the team would be associated. Anybody who's on the role delegation now, that's another document that outlines who does what when. In parallel, then we'd have the ranges from the local labs retained in the site file, so that you can identify if somebody has a lab result in a year's time, is this out of range and so on. And then details around the drug, in this case, the IMP. That's the labeling, handling, receipt, destruction, accountability, and so on, details for that. And then procedures around unblinding. If this is a blinded clinical trial, that you have details and measures put in place that will allow you to unblind if it is required. And then right before you get the study off the ground, you are required to qualify the site as greenlit to enroll the first patient. So that really can be undertaken through training and initiation of the study, and then a few more steps that can be done locally to allow the first patient. So first patient, first visit, and Aideen will talk about that probably. What I want to highlight again is there at the bottom, it's Reg 3 of GCP has these documents listed in tables 1 and 2, and these are records that are expected to be present, and if you create other documents, that they would also be deemed essential as well, so just remember that qualification. And then during the course of the study, what you need to have is update your essential documents, keep that rolling, keep your, as I said earlier, keep your site file, your TMF, keep those constantly updated. All relevant communications, the communications section of any site file towards the end can be last printouts of emails, saved PDFs of decisions or clarifications that might have been sent back to the sponsor to say, is this patient has presented with this, is this patient eligible for the trial? And that communication then can be kept just in case it is needed for a year's time, or during the course of an inspection and so on. The signed or consent forms need to be retained, and also logs, screening logs, enrollment logs, and any source documents. So source documents could be hospital records, clinical charts, lab notes, emails, spreadsheets. You might have images and so on. So all of those then could be electronic or they could be paper-based. Your completed case report forms, and we have Heather later on talking about data entry and case report forms sitting within electronic data capture systems. Safety information and any notifications around new safety alerts that have been identified during the course of the study, reports, IMP accountability and destruction, any signatures that would be involved, and any biological sampling that would have been. So then at the point of termination of the study, as I said, this isn't exhaustive, but it just gives you an idea of what you need to have and what you need to have retained and have accessible when they are required. So that includes the audit and inspection has been conducted during the course of the study, and that should be retained. Close-out monitoring visits should be done by the sponsor to say, yes, everything is done, data is clean, we can close the site, there's no left unaccounted for at the site, has been expired and so on. All that can be done, and unless we talk later on about monitoring. Treatment allocation and decoding. So at the end of the blind trial, you need to have the unblinded allocations identified. And then your final reports back to your ethics committee and to competent authority, in this case, the HPRA, and also finally a full clinical study report, and update this through any corresponding databases that you're going to be working with. So which study documents are required? I've gone through what is required. It's not exhaustive, as I said. In addition, you might have other study documents depending on what you're looking at and at various time points. So you might have additional documents or additional information related to the design of the study, the regulatory framework that you've been following at that time and throughout the course of the study, any risk assessments and any measures that you mitigate risk or to address risk should be retained as well. Any study-specific ethical considerations, discussions that really you can't just file your final approval. You might have to file the elements that led up to you achieving approval for your study. Any requirements that are deemed required by the competent authority or ethics committee might be both standard generic requirements or ones that might be more study specific. Any requirements by your funder, whoever is funding the study, if it's an academic peer review, that would be the funder requirements will be followed, as are the institutional requirements wherever you are conducting the study, and any site level SOPs that were followed throughout the course of the study. So in the creation of documents, I just wanted to highlight a few things to consider. Implement a process for how documents are created, how they proceed, how quality control has been applied, how those documents have gone through a process of approval prior to release, and then how they are finally distributed. And then once they are distributed, how you can control where they sit, and if there are updates to be done, how you can redistribute and so on. Consider the application of a QMS quality management system, which will allow you to manage and control the creation and distribution of these documents, not of the essential documents. When you are creating documents, there are potentially many voices that will make your documents better. The creation of a protocol typically would take 20 people around a table. You might have statisticians, safety personnel, somebody involved in monitoring, clinicians, nursing staff, to all go through what the study design should be and all of the different factors, all of the different steps that should be followed throughout the course of the study. So get a lot of involvement where possible for most of your essential documents that will be critical. Cross-compare requirements and documents. So what I mean here is where you have said that you are going to do something in the protocol and cross-compare that to your patient information leaflet so that the patient then is told exactly what you are approved to do, and the patient then isn't blindsided by the fact that they have to return every month for this visit for 12 months. That is in the PIL. If it's in the protocol and if it's been approved in the protocol, the patient has to be informed for that. And equally, yes, in PC there, that summary of product characteristics is the little piece of paper that you get in a packet of aspirin from the chemist across the road. It's the simplified version of an IMPD or the investigations brochure. It lists in there some of the risks that might be associated with that product. You have to list in your patient information leaflet when you are creating this. You have to list all of the potential risks, even if it's a very minor chance of it happening. Pop that into your patient information leaflet so that the patient is fully informed as to what they are getting into, that they're aware of these risks and so on when they are enrolling into the study. Remove unnecessary complexity within the documents. Don't get too fancy just to impress. Be very specific and clear, and consider that ambiguity can lead to alternative interpretations. Really, I think a comma can make a difference in interpretation on inclusion-exclusion criteria. Really interrogate those. Take sample patients, virtual patients, put them through the inclusion-exclusion criteria to see if your interpretation is the same as somebody else who would enroll that patient, and so on. Consider the audience that you're designing the study document for. If it's aimed at a professional member of the team, a clinician or a pharmacist or a clinical trial monitor, that would be a very different language and a very different content than what you would provide to a participant. And equally within the participants, consider if it's an incapacitated adult, if it's a child, or if it's an adult with other abilities. Just consider the tone and the content of the documents that you're providing. And be aware of different operating differences or cultural differences. If you are a multinational clinical trial, for example, that protocol really can be adapted to allow those sites to do whatever they are required to do per protocol, but also in line with what their site. So when it comes to document storage, really it is important to consider the types of documents that you're looking at, whether based, electronic, and also the storage size and space required. Consider the study file transfer requirements per regulations, per competent authority, per sponsor, and per institution, what you're allowed to do, what you are mandated to do. Consider also who has access and restrict access to this data, to this information, to these documents, only to those who are entitled to see this, and of course control any chance for unauthorized amendments and so on. Consider the suitability and the cost of your storage requirement and your storage solution for the data or the materials that you're looking at. You have to consider that the system that you're using for storing your documents, your data during the study and later on at the point of archiving should allow you to identify the documents, should allow for version history, should allow you to search for the right document and data, and should allow you to access it and retrieve it. Consider as well the audit trail and metadata of any information or any data that you are, or any documents that you are storing. And also, as I said earlier, the retention period is very important to comply with what is required by legislation. And the duration depends on the study type. And for drug studies, in this case, it is up to it's 25 years. That changed a number of years ago. It used to be 15. So get familiar with what you are required to do across the board for all of these documents. GDP isn't called out explicitly in Good Clinical Practice, GCP. However, it's inherent throughout, and there's a number of sections there that refer to good documentation practice. If you are running a study, or if you're conducting a study on behalf of an external sponsor, monitoring visits and audits and inspections will all evaluate to ensure that the principles of good documentation practice are adhered to at each visit. So that is one of the supports that is provided, especially through monitoring visits. If somebody is subjected to a monitoring visit, consider it as a way, as a support to enhance your quality of what you are doing. So it is better to comply and go through it, and it will actually make things better. Now I'll finish off. My last slide here is ALCOA, or the ALCOA Plus principles. This is a set of guidelines or a framework really to enhance data integrity. And in this case, what we have is a list, an acronym really to cover the data being attributable. So that shows who did what, where, when, and why they did that. It is very important to make sure that you are documenting who is completing the activity. Have that clearly noted. If there's any documents or any, actually you can sign it, date it, get the appropriate signatures. If you're not the person who is authorized to do that, get their signatures on and have that attributed. And this really has to be in accordance with what is required or what is approved on the role delegation of those who is authorized to do what. Make sure that the data and the documents are legible, that they're contemporaneous, which means it's done now, no backdating, that it's done at the right time, that the documents are original, that they're unaltered. If they have to be altered, have it signed and dated and documented as to why something was altered or corrected, and have that retained. Accurate is right. And then the add-ons that have come on in recent years include completion or completeness. Is all the information available? Is the sequence correct through the consistent flow of the study? Endurance, is the data securely stored for long-term use? And availability, is the data, the documents accessible immediately? And I finish off by saying that in clinical research, we say this quite often: if it's not documented, you can't prove it happened. You can't say, oh, I remember that day the patient came in. It's not documented. That patient didn't come in. That what you're saying didn't actually happen. So you really have to document everything. So that is good. That's the point I want to